After my husband passed, his heirs walked through our front door like it was already theirs. They pointed at the house, the business, the accounts, and I signed everything away with a pen that felt heavier than grief. My lawyer begged me to fight, but I couldn't fight people who never saw me as family to begin with. On the day my will was read, their smiles were rehearsed, hungry, until their lawyer reached the sentence I'd tucked deep inside those pages. His voice cracked, and the room froze around us. If the people who should love you only show up for what you have, what do you owe them? Where are you watching from? I used to believe grief was the final weight a heart could carry. When my husband, Floyd, died, I learned that wasn't true. Grief doesn't just break you, it leaves you hollow enough for other people to climb inside and rearrange what's left. The morning after the funeral, I found myself sitting in his leather office chair, the one he'd spent so many nights in, balancing numbers and plans and dreams I thought we both shared. The air still smelled like him, cedar and old paper, and for a moment, I let myself pretend he would walk in again. But instead, the sound I heard was the front door opening, voices echoing down the hall. Not soft. Not mourning. Certain. Sydney and Mark, Floyd's sons from his first marriage, hadn't even let the funeral flowers wilt. They walked in like executors of a kingdom, brushing past me as if I were a secretary late to her shift. Sydney, the oldest, adjusted his tie as if the room itself needed impressing. Mark scanned the office like inventory. "We'll need access to the accounts," Sydney said. "No condolences." No pause. I nodded. I don't know why. Maybe habit. Maybe shock. Maybe the truth in that moment. I had been married to Floyd for 22 years, but suddenly I was aware I didn't know the version of him they knew, and maybe they didn't know the version I did. They spoke like auctioneers. The house. The vehicles. The shares in the business. The lake cabin. The health insurance policy. Even the furniture. Dad always said the desk should stay with blood. Blood. The word stung. As if I hadn't held Floyd's hand through chemo. As if I hadn't slept in hospital chairs and fought with doctors and watched the color drain from his eyes while they sent occasional texts, "Keep us updated." I reached for a notepad, ready to take down their demands like a list. I realized my hands were trembling. I placed them in my lap before they could see. Later that week, in my lawyer's office, I sat across from Mr. Harrington, a man whose kind eyes made everything harder. He flipped through the documents, jaw tightening. "You don't have to give them control," he said quietly. "You have legal standing. Let me fight for you." His words felt like a hand extended from shore while I was still underwater. But grief had made even breathing feel like a negotiation. Fighting felt impossible. "I don't want to spend what's left of my energy in a courtroom," I answered. "Let them have what they think they're owed." He stared at me for a long time, searching my face, maybe for resignation or resolve. I wasn't sure which he found. He finally nodded, but his voice was careful. "If this is what you choose, then you need to be heard somewhere. In writing, if not in court." So I went home and sat at Floyd's desk. I opened a blank document. The cursor blinked like a heartbeat. And I wrote, not a confession, not a threat, just truth. A single sentence, placed quietly in the middle of the pages. A sentence that didn't punish, but revealed. It wasn't about revenge. It was about boundaries I should have set years earlier, before grief made me fearless enough to finally do it. When the day came to sign, Sydney and Mark arrived early, flanked by their own attorney, a man with a briefcase that seemed heavier than he was. They didn't look at me so much as through me, already calculating, already arranging the world to fit around their new status. Sidney took the pen from the table before the lawyer even finished explaining the document. He acted as though he were the one authorizing history. I watched him sign his name, confident, practiced, the signature of someone who has never been told no. I wondered if Floyd had ever told him no. When it was my turn, I hesitated. Mr. Harrington placed his hand on the table, not touching mine, but close enough to remind me I wasn't invisible. I leaned forward and signed. And with that stroke of ink, I felt something snap inside me, not broken, not defeated. Released. They left without saying goodbye. That night, I walked the house alone. The rooms felt like stages after the audience had gone home. I stood in the doorway of our bedroom and traced the edge of the bed where Floyd once slept. My knees buckled, and I sat beside the dresser drawer where his watch still lay, unwound, silent. I picked it up and held it to my ear like a seashell. Silence. I realized then that I had spent so much of my life building a future with a man who didn't prepare a place for me in the past he'd shared with them. Two histories, running parallel, never touching. Maybe love can exist like that, partial, uneven, stitched together by hope instead of truth. In the days that followed, I learned to move through the house differently. I made coffee in the mornings and drank it by the window, watching the world go on, the way life always does. I started to feel the outline of who I might be without Floyd. Not a widow. Not a stepmother. Just someone finding her name again. But the final reading of the will was approaching, and the closer it got, the more I sensed an undercurrent of something unsettled. Grief has a way of revealing the fault lines in a family. And I knew, one sentence could be a map or a mirror, depending on who was reading. I didn't want revenge. I wanted clarity. Still, late at night, when the house was quiet and the dark felt like a witness, I found myself whispering into the emptiness, did I make the right choice, Floyd? Or did I finally make one just for me? The day of the reading, I dressed slowly, like someone preparing to step into a version of their life that didn't exist before. When I arrived, Sidney and Mark were already seated, their attorney flipping through the papers with confidence bordering on hunger. They didn't look at me. Mr. Harrington cleared his throat. The room settled. And for the first time since Floyd died, I felt something inside me steady. Not healed. But present. The lawyer began to read. What happens when the truth we choose is finally louder than the truth others expect from us? The lawyer's voice carried through the room like a slow tide, each word measured, deliberate. I sat with my hands folded, palms damp, the way one might wait for a verdict they already suspect is coming. Sidney lounged back in his chair, ankle crossed over his knee like he was bored by the administrative formality of inheriting his father's life. Mark leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes bright with impatience, like a man starving in front of a feast. They barely reacted as the list of assets was read. House, business shares, accounts. Each confirmation made their shoulders rise a little higher, as if wealth could physically straighten a spine. I felt strangely detached, like I was watching someone else's life dissolve. Maybe in their eyes, I was. Mr. Harrington didn't look at me, but I sensed him waiting for the moment, the sentence. The one I had written in the quiet of Floyd's office, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat on the screen. I didn't know then what it would do. I only knew it felt necessary. When the lawyer reached it, there was no dramatic pause, no theatrical emphasis. Just a shift. A tightening in his throat, like the page had grown heavier. I leave the remainder of what I have not given, the intangible things that cannot be measured or sold, to the one person who stood beside me without asking to stand in front. My legacy is not a prize, but a reflection. He cleared his throat. Continued. Should my heirs choose to remove her from the home before she is ready, or deny her safe access to what she needs to rebuild her life, then all assets named prior will be transferred into a trust in her name until a court can determine her rights as my spouse and caregiver. Silence. Thick. Immediate. Mark leaned back like the chair had suddenly burned him. Sydney's jaw clenched, the muscles in his face pulling tight like rope. Their lawyer blinked twice, smoothing the page as if that could change its contents. I didn't look at them. I kept my eyes on the wood grain of the table, the way it curved and looped like rivers splitting and meeting again. Floyd had written that sentence years before I ever saw it. Before chemo. Before hospital rooms. Before the end. I didn't know, I whispered, more to myself than anyone else. Mr. Harrington turned to me, voice soft. He did. Sydney shot forward in his chair. She manipulated him. She must have. He wouldn't. This isn't. He stopped only because rage had outrun his words. I felt something settle inside me then. Not triumph. Not vindication. Just air. Breath. The kind of exhale you take when a weight you've carried so long becomes memory instead of burden. You still have everything you asked for, I said quietly. This doesn't take anything from you. Mark laughed, short, sharp. You think this is nothing? You think tying our hands behind our backs is nothing? No, I met his eyes. I think it's the first time he tied mine. Mr. Harrington closed the folder, signaling the end. The lawyer across from us began packing up papers with trembling hands. Sydney stayed frozen, eyes locked on the table like if he stared hard enough, he could rewrite it. Anger has a sound. It isn't shouting. It's the silence people sit in when the world stops matching the version they built of it. When I stood, neither son moved. Their lawyer called after me, some legal phrasing about next steps, transitional agreements, timelines. The words slid off me like rain. Outside, the air was cold, but it felt real. I hadn't realized how long I'd been breathing inside other people's expectations. Mr. Harrington walked me to my car. We stood there for a moment, the world humming around us, traffic, wind, life. You did the hard thing, he said. I let them win, I answered. No, he shook his head. You let yourself stop losing. I didn't know if that was true. Not yet. But it felt like a place to start. In the weeks that followed, something shifted. The calls from Sydney became emails. Short. Formal. Like a man learning to speak through paperwork instead of entitlement. Mark didn't contact me at all. I stayed in the house, not forever, just long enough to feel like I wasn't leaving because I'd been pushed. I packed slowly, not like someone escaping, but like someone choosing. Each item, decided. Not ripped away. One afternoon, as I wrapped Floyd's watch in tissue paper, I realized I no longer needed to hear it tick. I didn't need proof that our life existed. The memories were mine, even the ones that hurt. I wrote Sydney and Mark a letter. Not an apology. Not a victory. Just a boundary. I hope you find a way to remember your father that doesn't require erasing me to do it. No signature. They knew who it was from. The day I left, I stood at the edge of the driveway, keys in hand, looking back at the house one last time. It didn't look like a battleground anymore. Just a place I had outgrown. I didn't know where I was going next. But for the first time in years, the not knowing felt like possibility instead of fear. As I drove away, the rearview mirror held the house smaller and smaller until it disappeared. I didn't look back again. Some people measure inheritance in money. Some measure it in freedom. I chose the kind I could carry with both hands. Thank you for listening. Where are you watching from?